for welcome to the Hello Hills podcast. Thanks for joining us on here.
All right, so you sent in some seriously interesting stuff for this deep dive. 100 questions about, well, everything, like from the meaning of life to what animals would say if they could talk. Oh, and then there's this YouTube transcript of a We Don't Talk About Bruno remix. It's something else. I'm honestly baffled, but super intrigued to see where this goes.
I have to admit, when I first saw these sources, I was puzzled too, but the more I look at them, the more I see a fascinating connection.
Okay, color me curious, because some of these questions are real head scratchers, like what makes art meaningful? That could spark a debate for hours.
It's a great question because there's no single answer. What we consider meaningful can be so subjective and personal, but the question itself forces us to think critically about art's purpose and its impact on us.
Exactly. And then there are some that are just plain fun. Like, what's a unique food combination you love? You know, just to lighten the mood.
Well, since you brought it up, I'm quite partial to a bit of dark chocolate with blue cheese. Don't knock it till you try it.
Whoa, okay. Maybe I'll stick to my peanut butter and pickle sandwiches for now. But I love that you're willing to experiment with flavors. And speaking of experimenting, let's talk about this YouTube transcript. It's a remix, but not the kind you hear on the radio. Let me give you a taste. Bruno's Got a Prophecy says, I'll be rich and famous, but first I gotta eat this giant bleep pot roast. I mean, where do you even start with that?
It definitely pushes the boundaries of what we typically consider music. But what if we approach it less as a traditional song and more as a commentary on pop culture? Maybe even a satirical take on how obsessed we are with things like Bruno from Encanto.
Okay, I can see that. So instead of judging it purely on its musical merits, we look at the message behind the madness.
Precisely. And that's where I see the link between these seemingly disparate sources. Both the list of questions and this wild remix are forms of creative expression. One uses language to explore ideas, the other uses music and lyrics to subvert expectations and make us think differently about something familiar.
So it's like they're both playing with existing structures, language music storytelling, but twisting them to create something new and thought-provoking. One makes us ponder life's big questions. The other makes us laugh and question our assumptions about pop culture.
Exactly. And what's interesting is how both of these approaches can actually enhance our understanding of the world. The questions encourage us to dig deeper, to challenge our preconceived notions, and to seek new knowledge.
And the remix, as bizarre as it is, forces us to look at something familiar from a completely different angle. It's like a mental workout, shaking things up and making us reevaluate what we thought we knew.
It reminds us that there's always more than one way to see things. And sometimes the most unconventional approaches can lead to the most surprising insights.
Okay, so we've established that both these sources, wild as they are, have something to do with creative expression. But let's unpack how they can actually help us learn more effectively. Because you, dear listener, sent these in for a deep dive. And I'm betting you're looking for more than just a good laugh.
Absolutely. And it's interesting you use the word unpack, because that's precisely what effective questioning does. It allows us to break down complex topics into smaller, more manageable chunks.
Right, like instead of getting overwhelmed by the vastness of a topic like the meaning of life, we can ask ourselves smaller, more focused questions like, what brings me joy? Or what impact do I want to have on the world? It helps narrow our focus.
And make the learning process less daunting.
Exactly, and there are specific techniques that can make this process even more effective. For example, the 5 whys method used in problem solving can also be applied to learning. You start with a broad question, then keep asking why to dig deeper and uncover the root causes or underlying principles.
This is cool. So say I'm fascinated by the concept of time travel. Instead of just Googling, is time travel possible? I get asked, why do we perceive time as linear? Then why is the speed of light considered a constant? Each why leads me down a more specific path of inquiry. You got it. And this focused questioning not only helps you acquire knowledge more efficiently, but it also makes it more likely that you'll retain that information because you've actively engaged with the topic.
It's like you're creating a mental map instead of just passively absorbing facts.
That's a great analogy. Now, how do you think this connects to the idea of remixing information?
That's interesting. I guess just like asking the right questions helps us break down information and make connections. Remixing encourages us to take those bits of information and rearrange them, combine them in new ways, and see what new meaning emerges.
Exactly. And this process of remixing is deeply ingrained in how we learn. Think about how children learn language. They hear words and phrases, and then start experimenting, putting them together in new combinations, sometimes making hilarious mistakes along the way. But through this process of trial and error, they eventually master the language.
So it's not about sticking rigidly to the official version of things, but about playing with the pieces, seeing how they fit together, and maybe even breaking a few rules along the way.
Precisely. And that's where things get really exciting. Remixing allows us to move beyond simply absorbing information to actively constructing knowledge, making it personal and meaningful to us.
Okay, so back to our listener who wants to gain knowledge quickly but thoroughly. How does remix culture help with that? It seems like it could make things more complex, not less.
That's a fair point. But remember, remixing isn't just about adding more information. It's about finding new ways to understand and connect with the information you already have. It's like taking a bunch of different ingredients and creating a whole new dish. You're not necessarily adding more food, but you're transforming it into something more flavorful and satisfying.
So instead of getting bogged down in the sheer volume of information out there, remixing helps us make sense of it, find the patterns, and extract the most meaningful insights.
Exactly. And it can also make learning more engaging and enjoyable. Remixing allows us to bring our own unique perspectives and experiences to the table, making the learning process feel less like a chore and more like a creative endeavor.
It's like turning learning into a game, a puzzle to solve a story to tell.
Precisely. And the more we engage in this playful process of remixing, the more likely we are to have those aha moments, those flashes of insight that make learning so rewarding.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, from the power of asking the right questions to the surprising learning potential of remix culture. But before we wrap up, let's bring this all home for our listener. You know they're looking to gain knowledge quickly but thoroughly, and I want to make sure they walk away with some actionable takeaways.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's one thing to understand these concepts in theory, but it's another thing entirely to apply them in our daily lives.
So let's say I'm fascinated by a particular topic. Maybe it's something I need to learn for work. Or maybe it's just a personal passion. What's the first step in remixing this information and making it truly my own?
Well, instead of just passively consuming information from a single source, like reading a textbook or watching a documentary, think about how you can actively engage with that information. Imagine you're a DJ, and the information is your raw material. How can you sample it loop? Add your own beats and melodies to create something new and unique.
Okay, I like that analogy. So maybe instead of just highlighting passages in a book, I could try summarizing the key concepts in my own words, or even create diagrams or mind maps to visualize the connections between ideas.
Exactly. Or you could take those summaries and turn them into a series of tweets, a blog post, or even a short video. The act of translating information into a different format forces you to process it more deeply and make it your own.
And this ties into our earlier discussion about questioning. By asking ourselves questions like, how does this information connect to what I already know, or what are the implications of this idea, we're essentially remixing the information in our minds, making it more meaningful and memorable.
Precisely. And don't be afraid to draw inspiration from unexpected sources. Just like our listeners, we don't talk about Bruno Remix. Sometimes the most unlikely combinations can spark the most creative insights. What if you tried combining ideas from a scientific article with a piece of classical music, or a historical event with a contemporary meme?
That's a great point. It's about breaking free from those traditional linear ways of thinking and allowing ourselves to make connections that might seem strange or even absurd at first glance.
Exactly. And who knows, you might stumble upon a whole new perspective or a creative solution that you never would have considered otherwise. Remember, learning isn't just about accumulating knowledge, it's about transforming information into something that resonates with you personally, something that expands your understanding and empowers you to see the world in new ways.
And that's what this deep dive has been all about. We started with two seemingly random sources, and we ended up with a toolkit for remixing information and making learning a more engaging, creative, and ultimately more rewarding experience.
It's been a fascinating journey, and we hope our listener feels inspired to embrace the power of questioning, the joy of remixing, and the endless possibilities that come with making learning a personal adventure.
Before we sign off, we want to leave you with one final thought. If you could remix your own life story, what elements would you weave in from your favorite books, movies, or even real-life events? What skills, adventures, or relationships would you incorporate to make your own narrative even richer and more meaningful?
Let that question be your guide as you continue to explore, learn, and remix your way through life. Remember, those fascinating stories are often the ones we create ourselves.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.
Don't forget to listen to our upcoming podcasts, and thanks for popping into this with us.
wish you a Merry Christmas. We wish you a Merry Christmas. We wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.